Hey everyone, in this video today I'm going to compare the Mad Max franchise to the Superman franchise. Mad Max currently has 5 movies, Superman has 6. To be clear, not including Batman v Superman or Justice League. We're just looking at Superman's standalone movies. First of all, let's look at the highest Rotten Tomatoes score for each franchise. When it comes to Mad Max, Fury Road has the highest score, 97%. When it comes to Superman, right now, that first Superman movie has the highest score of 94%. Mad Max wins this round. Next, let's look at the lowest score for each franchise. When you think about Mad Max, what's really impressive here is that Beyond Thunderdome has the lowest score, and it still has a 79%. That's still certified fresh. That's almost 80%. If the lowest rated movie in your franchise still has a 79% on Rotten Tomatoes, wow, that's a really good sign. Whereas if Superman, the lowest score is only a 10% for Superman Quest for Peace. So Mad Max wins this one by a lot. And next, we're going to look at the average score for each franchise. And when you look at Mad Max, man, it has an average score of 90%. Ooh, that's really, really good. When it comes to Superman, you have an average of 57.67. So Mad Max again wins this round. Next, we're going to look at how much of a gap there is between the lowest and highest score. And, well, it's pretty obvious by this point that Mad Max is going to win this again because the lowest score is still 79%. Highest is 97. So that's only a gap of 18. When it comes to Superman, lowest score 10%, highest score 94, gap of 84. Mad Max wins the round again, so Mad Max is already going to win the debate regardless of which franchise I personally prefer. But now let's look at that question. Which franchise do I prefer? When it comes to the Superman standalone films, I like those first two Richard Donner movies. Certainly there are aspects of them that do feel dated when you watch them now. The visuals don't always hold up. The fact that at the end of the first film, Superman literally reverses time to save Lois Lane and suffers no penalty from this whatsoever, despite the fact that the movie sets up the fact that Superman is not supposed to interfere in human history. This is something that Jor-El literally says multiple times in the movie, and yet Superman breaks this rule at the end without any kind of consequences whatsoever. That's never worked for me. And also, if think about it, Lex Luthor isn't really much of a threat to Superman at all. So, I mean, he certainly isn't the strongest villain. I like the performance, but the character doesn't really seem like he is someone Superman has to be all that worried about. I mean, the end of the first Superman film, if you think about it, Lex Luthor claims that Superman couldn't stop 2 missiles. But I'm just sitting here going, wait a minute, Superman's fast enough to reverse time in order to save Lois. Seems to me like he's fast enough to stop 2 missiles. But still, I think those first two movies hold up as good movies. I have not seen Superman Free, Quest for Peace, or Superman Returns anytime recently. I don't know if I even have seen them before, to be honest. And when it comes to Man of Steel, I think this movie is pretty frustrating, honestly, because there are things about it that I enjoy. I think Michael Shannon gives a good performance as Zod. I like that you understand Zod was created for one singular purpose, to protect Krypton. So you can understand where he's coming from. And also, John Williams does a great job with the score. There are certainly good visuals in this movie. Is there something fun about actually seeing big action set pieces where Superman and Zod are fighting each other, whole buildings are destroyed, buildings are exploding, there's so much destruction going on? Sure, that's nice to see. We hadn't seen it in the previous Superman films. Man of Steel has a big budget and CGI behind it, so Zack Snyder was able to show us big, gigantic action set pieces, which we hadn't seen before in previous movies. But I also think there are problems with Man of Steel. I've never bought into the romance between Superman and Lois Lane. It's always seemed very rushed to me, as many people have talked about before. Why didn't Zod try terraforming Mars or some other planet? The movie doesn't provide an explanation for this question. Also, Zod claims that he's willing to do anything at all to save his people. You're like, Zod, why don't you try making a kid with one of the female Kryptonians that's with you? You claim you're willing to do anything to save your people. Why not try that? And also at the end, I've never liked that you have this big dramatic moment where Superman kills Zod and he lets out this scream. But then immediately after that, we cut to Superman destroying a satellite and we make a joke about how hot Superman is. It's like, Snyder, you had this big dramatic moment, you then undercut it with humor. We're not actually taking time to address the ramifications of Superman killing Zod. That's always been my biggest problem. I'm not inherently against the idea of Superman having to make this tough call to kill Zod, but I think the movie doesn't spend enough time on what Superman actually thinks about this, how he feels about what he did. And while I think the look of Krypton is interesting, I like Russell Crowe's performance. And during that scene when Jor-El is talking to Superman about his origins, the way it's visualized is certainly interesting, but I also have always felt like Kal-El doesn't really have a lot of agency here, because he's just either doing whatever Jonathan's telling him to do or doing whatever Jor-El's telling him to do. Thus, we don't get to see Clark make his own choices. And also, when you have a scene where Superman goes to a church to talk to a priest, and there's literally a portrait of Jesus on the church walls, it's like, oh wow, Zack Snyder, the religious imagery here is so obvious. Or when Superman's flying out in space, it literally, for a bit there, looks like Jesus on the cross. You're like, Snyder, you might as well be shouting into a bullhorn, Clark Kent is Jesus. I also think that Superman shows way too much disregard for innocent civilians in Man of Steel. He doesn't do enough to actually try to take the battle away from a big city. I've always found that off-putting. Thus, overall, I don't really enjoy Man of Steel. I think it's a movie with a lot of potential that isn't really realized. And when it comes to Mad Max, I think that almost all movies in this franchise are really good. I think Thunderdome is the weakest. There are things about it that I enjoy, but also it feels to me like a Mad Max movie that is lacking the teeth that the other movies have. It doesn't have the bite that I want from a movie in this franchise. You think about it, a lot of the Mad Max movies have an abrasiveness to them. You don't really have that with Thunderdome. It's rated PG-13. But even though Thunderdome is the weakest film, I don't think it's all that bad, to be honest. So I think this one is pretty easy for me. I absolutely prefer the Mad Max franchise, so it not only won this debate, but actually won every single round. That'll be it for now.